All right, so hi, folks. I'm back with my dear friend and brilliant sex and relationship therapist, Alexandra Bossy, based in Mexico. And today, I'm not exactly sure what we're going to title this video. I have a title for the title for the calendar invite that I sent to Allie might not be what we use, or it could be. We'll find out. But all of it to say, we're going to sort of talk a little bit more about sex and relationships, and it's going to be kind of a window into just the way that Allie and I talk about things. And I'm going to refer to her as Allie because I won't be able to break that habit in this video. But all of that being said, so Alexandra is both personas are part of the BDSM community, and I've learned a lot from her as she's entered and navigated that world in a way that has been really enlightening and helpful for me in my own personal life and just perspective. And so that's part of it's essentially that's the premise of the conversation, and we'll see where it goes. Do you want to add anything, Allie, before, or do you want to do you want to start us off? Is there anything, burning that you were like, this is what Amanda?
Well, I'm just getting flashbacks now of like when I entered into this journey, and I feel like it was very tumultuous for the both of us.
Yeah, it was at a time in our lives where both of us were just like, what is happening? I don't understand.
Yeah, like we were both going through some shit, and then also I feel like I was like in this like chaotic state, and so
Yeah. Yeah,
naturally, what's that?
It was before you moved to Mexico, right? It was before
Yeah.
when you were in that state of like, I don't know where I'm supposed to be right now. Like
Exactly. Like there were so many changes going on in my like pretty much in every single way, in every aspect of life. Yeah, so that was an interesting time for sure. Just because so many things were like up in the air and unstable, and I feel like when people go through this first part of like getting into the community and like discovering what their desires are, like like exploring, it's like very exciting, right? Like it'll be referred to sometimes as sub frenzy, and and it's just this like, oh, I want to try everything, I want to meet everybody, like I want to do everything. So for other people close to them, I feel like, and in this case with you, because we are very close, it's just like you're gonna get sucked into it too.
yeah. No, I was basically living vicariously through
Yeah,
you at that time.
exactly.
Which was really great for me because then I didn't have to worry about like the vet. Like I was just along for the ride, which was really kind of nice. As someone who is also new to that space where I was like, okay, yeah, I don't know. Like,
You're like, I don't know what's going on.
like I can't help you, Allie, but I'm here for you.
No, it's definitely helpful. Definitely.
um but because I was and anticipating this conversation because I was like how do we like what my mind went in like a million different directions of all of the different things that we could talk about depending on what was on our minds today. And so but I was thinking about when you were first getting into it and just um I think one of the things that like always comes up for me, and like because this is true even now, where like regardless of whether it's for play or for relationship, I'm like, I don't, I basically been celibate since the relationship situationship I'll refer to as my masterclass. Uh, um, for different reasons. We may or may not get into that audience, but all of that to say, like basically, like I have it because, and part of that is just for my own desires and goals and focusing more on myself, and part of it is like trust is a big thing, and there's a lot that goes like for me, there's a lot of investment that goes into building trust with somebody, and especially in these types of dynamics, I think that's a huge part of it. And so how for you, I feel like now you've got it down, but I remember in the beginning too, that was also like a big learning curve in terms of figuring out or learning how to engage in these spaces and recognizing like when there's trust or when there like somebody sort of speaks the same language when it comes to play and the dynamics and things like that.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a really, really, really important thing. So I think it's still a challenge to find people who are really trustworthy. And I think what I learned in my experience is like one,
The dogs really have a lot that they want to add to this conversation today.
that's Marvel.
Speaking of trust, Marvel's the one with the trust issues, guys. So that's
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, he's more avoidantly attached and Thomas is more anxiously attached.
Love it. Love it. See, and this is
So,
just as an aside for the audience members, this is what happens when you have clinical therapy training is you read everything through the lens and the language that you speak. So.
exactly. They have been psychoanalyzed again. Um, yeah, so and then this one out here, the neighbor's dog, he's just barking for no reason. I mean, I'm sure he has a reason. It's not visible to anybody else.
Yeah.
Just loves to
He
bark.
knows what his reason is. Nobody else
Yeah.
does.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think with in the scene, it's like my experience getting to know DOMs and trying to like connect with DOMs. Yeah, I realized like if they don't have the patience to like really have like conversations around like difficult conversations or things that like feelings type conversations, because I think a lot of people look for boundaries, which is also really important. I found like a lot of them were fine with those conversations around boundaries and stuff, but not so much around like feelings or just processing things. And so that to me now is like pretty much no, if they're not willing to have those kinds of conversations or don't have the patience for it, like that they're not really somebody I can trust with my feelings. And to me, power exchange is an extremely emotional sort of place to be in. So
Yeah.
so it's going to be emotional, right? And so there's some who just like don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Well, and that's like because I was thinking back to like I remember at one point you were just like, oh, you're so much more of a dom, Amanda, than you would be a sub, and I'm like, yeah, because that's probably what feels safer to me.
Yeah.
Um, because I feel like I'm like it's much easier for me to enjoy myself when I am basically the one controlling the pleasure that my partner is receiving. And so like through like by knowing what they want or knowing sort of what
Mhm.
they're looking for. And so like that, I'm like, yeah, when I get to be the one give like essentially giving, right? When I get to be the one like teasing and playing and doing all of the fun stuff for me of like having that power of their pleasure, that's like, I'm like, that's easy. Like, that's great. Cause then I don't have to get super vulnerable. But for me to fully submit to someone, I'm like, I need to trust them completely. And like, and I was thinking about this because like, even with my master class, I think that was the safest intimate relationship I've ever had. And even then, like, in order to like reach like the biggest type of climax, right? Or like to fully let go, like still couldn't because I knew I wasn't emotionally safe with him. Like
Mhm.
I could trust him physically and sexually, yes, but I couldn't trust him emotionally. And I knew that. And that was clear going into it. And so it was like, oh, I can't let
Right.
go.
Can't even go there. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think it's sort of like if you're just looking for fun and play, maybe that doesn't matter, right? The emotion part doesn't matter. But I think for us, And maybe it is because we both are on that sort of like demisexual part of the spectrum. Like that emotional element is so critical for like full, complete surrender and release.
Mhm.
Which I
Well,
think
and
is
I think
interesting.
BDSM like elicits those emotions regardless
Oh
in
yeah.
really strong and powerful ways, where it can be like something traumatic that you're resolving or something, you're like infusing these elements of pain or degradation or humiliation or things that are going to evoke emotions. Like it is psychological.
Yeah. No, I think, well, and that was the other thing that I remember too when you were first getting into it. I don't remember, at some point, I remember having this conversation where you were sharing about some experience that you had or some scene that you had played through. And it was so clear to me how therapeutic that was for you. And I was like, yeah, this is therapy. Like this is like this is like
Right.
exposure therapy.
Exactly.
In a lot of ways, which again is why it's sort of like, okay, like having somebody that you can maybe not trust with your life, but like, well, I mean, maybe, but depending on what you're playing with. But like someone who you can trust to like understand that dynamic and how to like build and construct and like play through the scene and respect the boundaries within that is so critical. And I think that's why I think I'm with you with the emotional piece too, where it's like if they don't have any like emotional intelligence around it, that to me is like I would have a hard time. I might like then we're not going to do like we're not going to get into like the deep play. We're not going to get into some of the like
Right. Exactly.
deeper, more complicated scenes because I can't like because I know that's going to activate some shit for me, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But so like how do you feel now? Or like how do like well, like what from where you started and the sub frenzy that and all of that kind of thing to where you are now, like reflecting on that, what has that been like for you or sort of what comes up?
Well, I think now I'm just more grounded and like I just kind of ask people that straight up. And I do kind of explain the demisexual piece as well is part of that because that is just fundamental for my attraction to the person anyway. But um so now I being more within like a trusted group of people, like now the people I've been talking to are within like a local community, and not online, not people I'm like connecting from online. Even if those people were local to me, like they were still kind of like from the black hole of the internet. um,
Okay.
so like the vetting process, I mean, this isn't like perfect, but there's just a little bit more vetting, I guess, with this. And so they have been able to communicate with me like, yeah, right now I am just looking for fun. I wouldn't really be able to hold an emotional space um or I am interested in that, but this is what I'm wary of, or this is where I'm at because of my last relationship or things like it's an actual dialogue. And so then we can actually see where we're at. And like for people who are like, yeah, I'm just not in that place, then it's like, okay, cool. Well, maybe we'll see each other around or something, but we're not in a place to like engage in that together. Or with the others, it's kind of like, okay, well, let's get to know each other a little bit more and see where we're at, but there's no pressure and there's no rush. Like the DOMs that, yeah, don't have the patience for this process and don't want to actually go through this process and just say like, they just want you to start playing right away. Huge, like, no, for me. That's like not trustworthy at all.
No. Yeah, well, because to me, I mean, like, and everybody has their own style and flavor and preference, but to me, that would read as like, okay, you are just in this for the power trip, and I don't, that's
Exactly.
not playing. Like, that's not playing.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess this could go for subs too. There's like some
Yeah.
people who just really are like forceful about that role and wanting to play and things like that. And it's the same situation of like, no, I want to like really get to know where you're at more and what you actually want. And sometimes that can be more difficult because subs sometimes can struggle more with boundaries and like
What?
yeah. And like, oh, I just want what you want sort of thing. And it's like, okay, we're like, I don't trust you as a sub either then
Yeah.
I don't trust that you know yourself well enough to engage in this kind of play, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's important. I think like some of the stereotypes that I think, and like we've talked about this when you were getting into it, of like, people just getting into it, or people who are into that are only about the power. It's just a way of like an excuse for being abusive or an excuse for whatever, and I think, and that's not, I'm like, as I learned through you, especially, like, that's just not true. That's not the reality of the scene as a whole. And I think it, like, just like anything, right? Like just how like therapy will attract narcissists who love having power over vulnerable people, like BDSM will attract people who are both looking for I think they're looking for spaces where they feel that basically are enabling a story that they have about themselves, whether that's as a sub or as a dom, in terms of their desire for power um or their with the sub dynamic there, when someone doesn't know themselves well enough. To me, I think sometimes that's like a result of like a fear of, like, for whatever reason, whether it's the conditioning in their life or experiences that they've had, like, I don't know what I want, or it hasn't been safe for me to like want what I want or to express that. And so, but here in this space, I don't even have to think about it. So someone else will do the thinking for me, and I can just keep doing that. Um, and I think there's times when that's fine, and then there's times when, I think it can put you at risk, like we've been talking about, where if you don't know, if you haven't explored your own pleasure enough, regardless of where you fit on that spectrum, or know what you're looking for, what your vulnerabilities are, then it can be really easy to open yourself up to people who are more predatory in the space.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's why there is the stereotype of like people preying on like new subs and things like that. Because like maybe they haven't learned communication very well yet, or what they're interested in, or boundaries or things like that. So it is an easy place to hide. It's an easy guise to put on, and an easy, yeah, vulnerable situation basically to take advantage of. So that's what is kind of nice about the community aspect of it, though,
Yeah.
is that people do talk, or that is the idea, right? Is that people will talk, people will vet, people will share their experiences. And so that actually makes me feel a lot safer than just like out in the wild where like, there's all these abusive people and you don't know. I mean, you really don't know. And maybe like an ex will contact you or something like that, but or you'll kind of like know something from their history that indicates they might be a harmful person for you. And
Yeah.
but it's not like, then all the other stories about like, oh, this person's just jealous, or this person is just trying to get in the way, or whatever, like those
Yeah.
stories come up. And so it can be more difficult for people to actually stay safe, I think, out in the wild.
But yeah, so we were talking about the vetting and safety, and I do think being able to like meet in person or have that, and especially because we've been so chronically online, it's so easy to find comfort in that, and especially I think in more taboo or in spaces that feel more like hidden or stigmatized, being online sometimes feels safer. But again, I think it kind of like people they're in every space. People exploit that type of vulnerability and fear. So being able to meet in person, or even did you go to a club once? I can't remember. I feel like you thought of there was like some open house at a club somewhere. And I feel like you wanted to go, but I can't remember if you ever made it.
For BDSM stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
Like those like
oh yeah, I wanted to go, but I didn't, yeah, I wasn't able to make it. Yeah, I wanted to go. That was in Brooklyn. But yeah, it's kind of, I think BDSM, the community like does try to have more like safety guidelines in place than most other like clubs that don't that are like sexually focused, but not clubs or like parties or things like that, but they're not a part of that community. Like you'll see a lot of just like off the wall shit happening, or just, I mean, maybe it is kind of normalized, but to me it's just like, how is this, okay. Like where certain things in BDSM are pretty like, substances really shouldn't be involved at all. That's considered to be like a safety violation. And like some
yeah.
of these other places will just be like handing out drugs and things. So
Yeah. Well, I think like, I think it's like one, there's just the intimidation factor of as a newbie going to a club where it's sort of like,
Mhm.
okay, like I want to go because these are my people or this is the space that I want to explore. But like, how do I know? And because I feel like that was part of I remember having that conversation when you were like, there's this event and I really want to go. I don't know if I'll be able to make it, but also I'm really nervous. Uh, More just from that, like from the like the social anxiety
Right.
standpoint of like you're entering into this space that is new to you with people where there are a lot of rules or there's a whole language and like norms around it, like what's in terms of like what is safe and what's not safe or what's acceptable and what's
Mhm.
not acceptable. And so learning that and because, you know, depending on when you're entering into the space where you are actually getting access to reliable information, I'm sure some people have already been taken advantage of. And so they have that trepidation going into
Exactly.
those types of spaces. Because I think like having those rules is really helpful. And I remember like there are some really great resources online. And even on TikTok, like, I've had people come across my TikTok feed um that are like legit and talk about this kind of thing and call out, people who are just sort of using the sensationalism of BDSM rather than actually like they're clearly not an actual member or part of that community um to
Mm.
to get followers or to get clout or to sort of like woo people or whatever do whatever it is that they're trying to do, like be exploitative in some way. But I think and like but anyway, this is just like a bunch of random thoughts that are popping into my head as we're talking about this. So because I was like the other thing that I was thinking about, because you are getting into Shibari, there was a creator on there who I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And of course it came on because we've been having conversations about it. So the algorithm, heard us.
As usual.
Because I was like, oh, so I haven't
It's like
Googled
whatever
it.
I'm doing in my life somehow pops up in your feed.
Yes, exactly. 100%. I don't know, does it ever happen? I mean, you're not as active as I am on social media. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't.
But yeah, I don't
I
know.
hear
We're
it
just really linked.
sometimes, but yeah,
We're somehow psychically linked.
yeah.
But yeah, but anyway, what I appreciated in his content or sort of what helped me I was like, is he legit? Like, what is his deal? But he talks about like you need to know what you're doing because like if you tie something particularly tight or if you tie the wrong knot and your partner, like you need to know what nerve damage looks like or start like the signs or early warning signs because you could cause a lot of damage to somebody if you're tying them in a position that their body doesn't normally sit in, or exist within for too long. Like you can cause some serious physical damage. And so you need like yes, play, but like be cautious. You know?
Exactly. It is dangerous. It can be dangerous. I mean, certain types of play, especially like impact play and things too, because with the pleasure aspect, sometimes you're not as sensitive to the pain, right? It
Right.
like feels more pleasurable, or you're focused more on the pleasure. So you don't actually realize like that you're hurting something.
Right. Yeah, like what like how, like learning that like that line between when is it like when is the pain reaching a limit that I like is going to cause more like permanent damage versus
Right.
like temporary discomfort. You know?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider besides, yeah, there's the physical, the emotional, there's just there's a lot. But what I like about it is that people really like, it's a lot of people who are like relationship nerds, I feel like, or just like, sexuality nerds, like they really take the time to like investigate these things and figure out like, wait, what is like the best model for safety, and how can we explain it, and how can we sort of summarize these things, and how can we have like tools in place to ensure it, and people who are like deeply interested in these elements of like relationships and eroticism.
Right. Well, I think that's the thing. Like for me, the fascination with it as someone who like, and I haven't really done like I again, I've pretty much just like taken advantage of the fact that I get to live vicariously through you, and then I reflect for myself. I'm like, what would I find pleasurable? What would I like? What would I
Mhm.
want to try? But it's that thing, right? Like it's that sort of, so I'm like more adjacent, um, but it's that piece of, and like I think what I enjoy about these conversations and why I love having them with you, because it is about this like let's like let's release the shame and stigma around what pleasure is and how like and what it's supposed to look like and how respectable it's supposed to be or whatever, like, and let's just really like get get intimate with pleasure and what do we find pleasurable and what does that look like, regardless of what the social norms are, regardless of what we've been taught. Because I think, to me, I feel like that's where with BDSM, where it's sort of that like, oh, I've noticed that when there's this dynamic at play, I get really turned on. And in this situation, that doesn't feel safe. But when it's
Mhm.
controlled or what, like, but I like, but how, so how can I experience that kind of pleasure in a way that makes me feel safe or in a way where, like from the, like, for me, I'm like, yeah, I would, if I engage, if I find someone that I would engage with, one, it would either just be for play, like, and something probably on the lighter side. Or it would be this like therapeutic thing of like, okay, we're gonna try this, but know that this is probably going to kick up some real deep rooted shit for me, and I don't know how I'm gonna feel about it. Like, but maybe confronting it or maybe working through this in a way with someone I trust or in an environment that feels controlled enough or where I like I know that there's rules and there's boundaries. And it's not real, whatever it
Right.
is. It's like, okay, yeah, like let's pull out the things that are like hidden in there, right? And I don't, which I think is part of why, like, there's probably a lot of like, there are some people who are just like, no, I don't even want to, we don't do that.
I want to open up that kind of.
Yeah. But for me, I just feel like that's like, that's like you know, an opportunity in this kind of space where, you know, we might be dealing with our own internalized shame, but the play, the experience, the encounter is purely from a place of play and pleasure. And so like let's use that to uncover the things that maybe we've been repressing in a way that feels safe or in a way where it's like I know that there's this thing lurking somewhere in here, this little saboteur. Like, can we draw her out and see what happens or see what her deal is so that I can either address it and move on from it, or if she actually ends up being a lot of fun, then maybe, then maybe we let her out to play a little bit more, whatever the case might be.
Exactly. I mean, it's a practice in self-attunement.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, which is what I enjoy. Like, it's just really a reflective tool for me. And a lot of it, I wouldn't have ever like even, I mean, some of it was like completely new, right? It was like introduced to me, like pet play, for example, you know, like I'd never really thought about that before.
Yeah.
And then I had people who were really interested in it and like introduced me and showed me things. And then that I was like, okay, well, why not? You know, why not? This seems like fun. Why not give it a try? And yeah, I learned a lot of different things about myself that I just wouldn't have really given myself the space to do otherwise. And um and like what does that represent? Like each role in the power exchange usually has like a different sort of effect, right? So it's like with pet play, it's like what does it feel like to be like doted upon, or
Yeah.
to be like, yeah, just completely like beloved and and taken care of, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I so what I love, I think that's interesting because I think like my perception of pet play, like there's that piece of it, but I'm like, but it's, and again, like this goes back to what I was saying, like, you know, like the complete lack of control, right? Like your owner is the one who's essentially controlling your entire environment in this like in that kind of scene. And so it's like, okay, like yes, I am being doted upon um and beloved and treated like a pet, but it's like, but that's all I get to be. Like, and I'm like,
The dog wants to become a fairy now.
right? Yeah, exactly, exactly. I'm like, what if I don't want to be a cat? Or what if I don't want to be that kind of cat? Like, and this is why I'm not usually a sub in any dynamic that I'm in.
Well, I mean, I think there's space for that, right? It's like there, that's part of the play is like
Yeah,
things can morph. It doesn't have to be like,
you're
or
right.
it can be like, oh, this is what I got from that time, but this next time I want to try this different sort of
Yeah,
persona, you know?
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's again, it's like that play element. Um, you know, it's so interesting to me, like having this exposure and getting into this, you know, through you and through like through people and talking to other people who are engaged in this kind of play where it's like, oh, it really is play. And the way that we are so socialized to perceive it is it's not play, is it's like purely about like power and control. Or it's this like really like erotic, like dangerous thing, like right, this like bad boy, bad girl thing. And it's like, oh no, it's just it's like you're saying, like I feel like that's like what you said is like the perfect summary. No, it's just a bunch of sex nerds who are like coming up with the like, or who are trying to figure out, okay, what is the weirdest shit that we can do right now that still feels good? Like, and how can we make
Right.
it feel good? Or what are the let's play pretend. Like, you know?
Exactly. It's like drama. It's a lot of like theater, I feel like.
Yeah. You know, and I do think it's interesting, as I'm sure there are people who take it much more seriously, but, or take themselves more seriously within that kind of space. As they're always as humans
But
are
like those aren't the
human.
fun ones to me. It's like that's another thing when it comes to trust. I'm like, if you're too serious, and how can I trust when like it turns out something is actually funny, or like, you know, I
Right,
feel uncomfortable and I start laughing or something, you know?
right, exactly, right, exactly. Oh my God. Yeah, I laugh at this like at the weirdest shit. Like that's laughing is like my coping mechanism sometimes.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
they're gonna like flip out at me because like this is like, again, this is also where like part of me is like, I kind of want to try being a sub with a particular type of person because it would be really funny.
Exactly. Yeah. And like if there's a like there's the DOMs who like seem to take themselves too seriously, but like at the end of the day, it's still a game too. And like, okay, maybe like a spanking would be warranted or something, but
Right? You know,
but that's just again, it's just part of like they're not actually their ego isn't actually being injured. They're just like, you know, they're just playing along with it essentially.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like I just like if I start laughing and since someone's like really serious or like has a really serious response to it, it's just going to make me laugh a lot harder unless I'm actually scared of them.
Exactly. And then yeah, you wouldn't want somebody
And then,
who's
and then we know it's no longer play. Uh,
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, because then, yeah, I mean, everybody gets triggered, but it's a matter of like being able to express when you're getting like, hey, I'm taking it personally right now, or I don't like it when you laugh at me or something, or like the laughing makes me uncomfortable or something is different than somebody just like
yeah,
getting upset, right? And frustrated on like again, not in the role, but just their ego essentially.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so, and I think, and again, to me, I think that goes to like the types of play partners that, at least like to me, because we're very similar in our, like the like personality character that we look for,
Hmm.
is having that, ability to communicate, to like, even if you don't know exactly what words to use, but you're willing to say like, hey, like, no, for real, this is a problem for me.
Right, exactly.
Like versus somebody who's just gonna shut down and internalize it and then get really weird. And then it's like, okay, well, now I have to go into therapist mode and like pull this out of you to figure out what just happened.
Exactly. Like, yeah, being dominant really requires a lot of like self-actualized work, I think. Like you really do have to be in like prepared to confront those situations in a way where you're not depending on the other person necessarily to resolve it for you. I mean, like yes, it's all like reciprocal at the end of the day, and afterwards like you both process what happened for you and things like that, um but it easily changes the roles, like you said, if like now the sub has to go into therapy, like the roles have now changed, whereas if it happens the same way, like the sub is having like is triggered and having a reaction, it would be more within the roles for the dom to go into like therapy mode or to sort of guide emotionally the sub at that point. So yeah, I mean, it's not that like the roles can't switch, but if you want to maintain that role, then you have to be like very aware of your triggers and have worked through them and things like that. Not that like everybody has to be perfect, going into this, like everybody starts somewhere, but there's a responsibility there to be able to like reflect on your emotions and communicate them.
Yeah, it's that like, self-awareness piece or just like I just think it's like the capacity for insight is really what it comes down to.
Right.
So like you don't have to be the most self-aware person, especially if you're just starting out, right? Like
Mhm.
um but like you have to be capable of and willing to self-reflect. Like if going inside yourself and I mean so now my mind's in the gutter, but like if go if like checking in with yourself, if checking in with yourself, like and asking yourself those questions of like, why did I respond to that? If your immediate response is to like externalize or blame other people, then I feel like this is not going to be a long-lived time, like a long-lived you know, scene that you
Mhm.
spend time in, kind of a thing, because the play partners are going to pick up on that and are not going to they're not going to tolerate it, regardless of what role you play, unless of course you're one of those more vulnerable subs who also lacks that, who also,
Right.
like, and
Right.
you
Then
just
it can
really,
get messy.
well, I feel like that's like, and this is where it's like, then what you're really doing, like, you're just looking for a toxic relationship under the banner and like trying to excuse it or trying to make it feel okay by labeling it this way. And then that's where it gets messy for everybody because it both is and it isn't either of those things.
Right.
And so it kind of blurs that line and creates all sorts of, misunderstandings around what's happening and what things are and all of the things.
Hmm. Yeah. So have you considered looking for a sub?
I know, I mean, like I like I have considered it and like, over the past, 2 years, I would say. Um, but I haven't mostly like in part just because where I'm at personally, and like I don't have the motivation or the energy to really take that on. Um, like at this because at this point I want something serious. I'm not looking for like to invest in anything that's temporary or short term. So like, which is why it's sort of like in this like weird, like I'm in this like weird space sometimes where I'm like, I really like listening to your experiences or your stories or like the things that come up in our conversations as friends. I'm like, it does sound like a lot of fun. I just, it's like the time and the investment of like getting into it and exploring it at this point for me. I'm like, I don't know. It's not really what I'm looking for. It's like I feel like it could be really fun, but what I'm looking for is something different. And so it creates that like, all right, I'll keep living until I like, it could be a factor in the partner that I pick, but in the dating thing scene, um, but yeah, I haven't fully explored my options.
Yeah. Yeah, it is tough. I mean, dating in general is tough, and finding somebody for this kind of dynamic is just as tough, I think.
Yeah. And like, and this is a story that I have, but where like it's like I live in a small city, so it feels like a small town. And so there's an element of like, yeah, I don't know. This well might be a little dry for me at this point. I mean, I could always be wrong. I'm always willing to be pleasantly surprised to find out that that's not the case. Um, but yeah, generally speaking, I mean, and maybe for play it would be different, uh, but yeah, I think I'm just sort of in the space of like, I'm like, I've been apart from some like hot and heavy makeout sessions, I've pretty much just been taking care of myself. And that's, you know, like,
Right.
yeah, no one, I have like a really hard barrier. Like, you must be this high to ride this ride, right? Or this tall to ride this ride kind of thing. Not literally, but like in the sense of I have my criteria.
Right. Your standards. Yes.
Yeah.
Um, how do you feel
Oh,
about what's that?
no, go ahead. Ask.
Oh, how do you feel about like um how taboo? Do you feel like it's still pretty taboo, BDSM and kink
Like for me or in general?
in general, just like your perception of other people's take on it?
I think I think it's still fairly taboo. I think it's like I'm trying to think of a good like example. I honestly I think it's similar to like the queer community where people like are fascinated by it and want to be a part of it in some way that feels excessive, like the commercialized, like the pink washing kind of a thing. So I feel like there's a way, like the people are like, yeah, like, BDS, it's so sexy, it's so kinky. But then, you know, you actually ask, like, then you ask them questions about what they want to do or what their pleasure is, or you sort of like, or if they've explored it, and they're like, no, I could never. And you're like, okay. So I think there's still a lot of like internalized stigma around it, but I think there's a lot of curiosity about it. Just like with everything, I think with sex, that's like sex and sexuality related, is people are really curious because it's such an like pleasure can be such an internal experience that they like people have things that are like this turns me on or this like makes me really happy or I get a lot of pleasure out of this, and I don't know if it's safe for me to admit that in certain spaces or not. um or I don't know if that's normal. And so people get drawn to these, peripheries or these sort of more hidden or less visible or like mainstream or less acceptable forms of sexual expression because they're like, I don't know, like I feel weird. Like, is it like how, like, where can I let my freak flag fly and in confidence, you know? So yeah, so I think it depends on who you're asking and like where you live. But I think people are sort of accepting that it's a thing and are not going to immediately like shun you if you admit that it's something that you're interested in or a community that you're a part of. But I think there's a lot of people who are like have their biases or stereotypes that they haven't quite challenged.
Hmm. Yeah, I think I've seen that quite a bit as well. Is like people might not be immediately like judgmental about it, but there's a perspective people have of like who's in this community, or when they hear something, a certain kink or something, then their mind goes to like this image of somebody who's like, it's just such a superficial like image of this thing. Like it's not a humanized way of looking at it. It's like
Yeah.
a stereotype or whatever, like just this really distant image that makes it feel like, oh, that's weird or something. Like that's the response. Or like, I wouldn't
Yeah.
do that either. Stuff like
Yeah. Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think there's a lot of kink shaming still around. Like, there are kinks that are like acceptable, like being
right.
tied up, right? Like things like that.
Exactly.
But then
Exactly.
there are kinks that are shamed or like heavily judged, and it's like it's all like, sure, there's a spectrum, but like we're talking about the same kind of dynamic. It just manifests differently, you know?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's all a part of the human sexual experience. Like,
Exactly. And at the end of the day, I feel like that's really, it's like exploring that and like, and you can be like me where it's like, you don't necessarily have to engage in the play if you don't want to or if that's not what you're looking for. But like the way that I engage with the community now at this point is like just be like through curiosity and then having some of that self-reflection of like would I enjoy that? Or if I'm having an immediate like, oh, that doesn't feel like that would be good. Like I'm what? And then like, I'm a very introspective person. And so then I will immediately go into, well, why did I react that way? Right.
exactly. Versus,
And
yeah,
so
having that reaction and like shame, like thinking, oh, those people are weird or something.
exactly. Yeah. So it's sort of like, what is it for me that would be like, is that something that I would find pleasurable or not? And there's like, at at a certain point, there are certain kinks or dynamics or types of play that I won't know unless I try them if they're pleasurable. And then there are some where it's just like, yeah, I just, I think I can know. I think I can,
Yeah.
I think I can say that that's a no for me.
Right.
Just in terms of like getting more familiar with what I like and what I know I like and how certain things make me feel, right? Or certain experiences have made me feel in the past where it's sort of, I think that's the other piece to me, at least in the BDSM community, where there's a little bit more of an open question with power exchange dynamics, because there's like, that is a space for me where historically, like in real life, has raised a lot of issues and like there's a lot of complicated emotions tied to it. And again, where it's like, yeah, if I'm in control, if I feel like I'm in control, then it's different. Like it doesn't kick up some of those emotions if we're playing or if we're switching roles or, or if it's a certain type of scene. Either I'm not going to be comfortable leading that scene regardless of what whatever role I'm in, um, or yeah, or I just know that it's going to like be hard to separate or compartmentalize old memories or old sort of, experiences from play. And so like my body's not going to know the difference. And so that's the part where it's like, okay, I might be open to it. Like that actually might be something that I would be into, but I would need to have a really solid partner for whatever kind of play that would be. Um, just because I know it's gonna be a tough one.
Yeah. Exactly. I think like with those situations, usually, that would be taken into account and planned for essentially. Like
Yeah.
you have to kind of plan, like, how are you going to reframe it when your body gets triggered and goes into trauma mode? Like, how is that person going to take care of you in the moment? And that's where like the shift happens.
Exactly. And I think I want to just sort of pull this like sort of pull this forward a bit for anybody watching, because I think this I think is a bit of a misconception that I had, where like when we're talking about BDSM and play and scenes, like Ali is saying, it is like everything is agreed upon in advance. Like it is planned out in advance. If there's some level of spontaneity that is discussed in advance of like, you know, what that kind of room for improvisation looks like, versus like you're having sex with somebody and it starts to get kinky and then it escalates without any, like in the moment, without any conversation. Like, sure, that's like BDSM style, but that's not necessarily like you're now practicing BDSM, if that makes sense, right? Like it's you got kinky in the moment and you got lost in the heat of the moment, and that can have like, and which is why it's like, okay, it doesn't mean that BDSM is might not be for you. It just means you might need more structure around that kind of play or that kind of sex, because when it's not structured or agreed upon in advance, that's when you get into these situations where for whichever partner, it can get really uncomfortable, or like you stop knowing what to do or how to handle a situation because it escalated too quickly.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like really the agreed upon stuff can include like how would you like me to respond, or if you do get triggered or if something comes up, what can I do to support you, so that there's guidance and an expectation, so that it's not like something happens spontaneously um, and then
And then no one knows what to do.
yeah, nobody knows what to do, and then it ends up being like just kind of reinforcing that trigger, that trauma, because like maybe they walk away, or maybe they don't say anything, or maybe whatever, if they don't give you the space to process it or to really feel the emotion, and they just want you to feel better or something, so that's where it can get a little bit more, yeah, a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. And it's, yeah,
Mhm.
and just, oh, go ahead.
That's it.
Yeah. I was just say like that can happen between partners, especially if you're consistent partners or whatever, or if you're like, if we're brand new partners and you're just like, I don't know what you like, so let's just see what happens. So it's not like, anybody is doing anything inherently wrong when things escalate like that, but it is like, it's just acknowledging that neither of you were equipped or prepared with the skills that you needed going into that exchange, if that comes up or if that happens, you know. Like, sure, sometimes it's malicious, but most of the time I would say, like,
Right.
I would say it's not like that person not knowing what to do doesn't make them a bad person. You getting triggered doesn't make you a bad person or like terrible in any way. It just means that neither of you knew what to expect and something unexpected happened that neither of you were prepared to handle.
Mhm.
So, which feels like something that could be said for many things in life.
Right. And then that would spark the conversation of like, well, how do you want to handle it moving forward?
Exactly, exactly. It's you come back together and you address it and then you kind of move forward from there.
Mhm.
And that's I think where like that aftercare piece can be really important. And knowing, learning to know what you need after any kind of sexual encounter, regardless of whether or not your partner is the one that gives it to you, is something to be aware of. Because I think, like, this is just talking in general with like sex, like just like how you navigate sex and sexuality is, and things that, speaking for myself, things that I've had to learn or the way that I've approached it, where it's like, okay, if I'm gonna like have a casual encounter with somebody, or if I'm going to sleep with somebody new, especially where there's no um like we're still getting to know each other, or there's no pre-established like expectation or understanding of what we like or don't like, and I know that after sex I feel really shitty, or I feel like this or whatever, like, or if it's like depending on whatever, I feel really empty, or I need that cuddling, or I need whatever. um Either I can either mention it to that person in advance if I know enough that it's something that I need with the other person. And then if they're not willing to give that to me, then I get to like, ideally you get to say no and say, oh, okay, no, I don't want to do that tonight. Or if you choose to do it anyway, like know what else will help you with that feeling or with that meet that need.
Mhm.
And again, like this is the part that I think, you know, be like at least this is the part that Allie's experience with BDSM for me because she does everything for me. Just kidding. Right? Like this is the part of like really like building that practice of self-attunement, right? Where it's like regardless of what you're doing, regardless of whether you're having a more, what we would refer to as vanilla, which is like a standard sexual relationship or sexual dynamic, or you're getting into kinks and BDSM and power exchanges, like learning your body, learning what pleasure feels like, and learning how your body responds to different types of interactions and pleasure and pain. Um, and and then the emotions that kicked up within that uh, can really open up your world to having clearer boundaries, which is always helpful, and then B, like really improving the quality of your experiences because you either know what you're going to say no to, or you just you know what you're willing to experiment with and play with. Like I don't, because I think there is some fun in that self-discovery process. It's like, you know, knowing what I like and only having what I like. Some people that's what they want. And then, for others, it's like, yeah, let's change it up a bit, or let's try something new. Or I didn't used to like this, but I really trust my partner. So maybe we should try it and like spice things up a bit, like just
Exactly.
having that openness to explore, but also that trust within yourself of this is who I am, and this is what I like, and this is what I don't like, and this is what I need. And I know if I don't get this, bad things happen. Or I know if I don't get this, like I'm gonna need to find some other way to get this need met. Right. And so the more open you can be with yourself, the more open you can be with your partners, and the healthier relationships, whether they're fun or serious, they can be. That's my
Exactly. Yeah. Like it opens up the conversation with, I mean, if you are partnered, then with your partner, and if you're not, with like whoever you're engaging with, or even just like solo play.
yeah.
But it opens up a dialogue around it, which is, I think, part of when people get stuck sexually, or they stop like feeling so much desire for their partner and things like that. It's because that dialogue is like, was either maybe never existent. I mean, it's kind of incredible actually how like we can go through entire relationships not really ever talking about sex, or if it is talking about it, it's just like, well, why isn't it happening as much as I wanted to, or why isn't it, or I'm just like dissatisfied, but I don't want to tell my partner, and so I avoid the conversation. Or it's not like an actual dialogue. It just comes up in these like in these moments of dissatisfaction or wanting something to change.
Yeah.
So this allows it to open up in a way of actually talking about fantasy, like you're opening up the fantasy world, which creates desire and it creates arousal. So you're really engaging in that process with your partner, or again, it could be alone, or with a less serious partner, but you're at least in the process together, not just like in your own world and not sharing it at all,
Yeah.
not sharing that fantasy world in any way. Which like, to an extent, um people enjoy having like the privacy of their fantasy worlds, but when they don't feel like they can share it with their partner because like they may be shamed for it, or maybe rejected, or maybe turned down, or something like that's where it can get problematic, I think. Instead of like, now you're engaging in this creative experience together and it's fun, right? It
Yeah,
brings the pleasure back into it, and the fun and play back into it.
exactly. No, and I think as you were like I was thinking about, growing up, like fantasy was a way of escaping and coping with my reality, right? And so it was private. It was that like this is the place, like this is my safe place, or this is the place where I get to be free because I don't feel free in this environment, or whatever the case might be. And so I think like depending on like when you start doing that, that can become a very like internalized process. And so like then you end up in a connection or you're in a partnership and maybe it's a really loving partnership, but you still have this coping mechanism of fantasy that maybe is no longer necessary. Like you don't need to escape your reality. Maybe you're happy with your reality, but you can't help but like the habit is there. And so it's like then you end up reinforcing old stories or old experiences of like my reality isn't good enough or this like whatever it is that sort of like launches you into that fantasy world as a coping strategy, um rather than checking because like what you're saying, because sometimes like maybe in the past sharing those fantasies or being open about what you were experiencing wasn't safe, or there was a reason why you weren't sharing that. And so like that, I think that's like these are the things that I feel like we can only learn in relationships sometimes, because it's like no, you now have this person who was never part of that history, who you are building a connection with, who you actually like and enjoy and are trying to build a solid relationship with. And they're going to challenge you to break old patterns, right? They're going to challenge you they're going to challenge the stories you have about how people react or respond to things, because they're not going to react the way that your family did or the way that your friends did or the way that your ex did. Like they're going to react in a different way, and giving them that room to surprise you and when you share a fantasy and them being like, oh my God, I have that same fantasy, or oh my God, that sounds so fun. What if we added this to it, right? And then it's like, oh my God, now like new level unlocked in our relationship, right? And so I think it's helpful to just recognize like, you know, that communication is really important, and it's understandable why it might feel scary or intimidating. Um, but challenge yourself, like challenge yourself to break out of those old patterns, and old stories, because that might be where some of that is coming from. And that story, right? That story that we tell ourselves of like, why isn't this sex happening? Or why aren't we having sex the way, you know, we used to? Or I obviously can't share anything about what I think about because they would judge me for it. You have no evidence for that. Like what's the like evidence? Let's evidence test that. Let's get real like let's get CBT with it. Here am I with it, right? Like, is that true? Where is that truth coming from?
Exactly. And I have definitely been surprised with a lot of people of like, I think I've been surprised with people just being more open to things than I would have assumed. Like, even if they're like, oh, yeah, I never thought about that before, but I'm kind of like curious or open to it. And then people who are like, oh, yeah, that's hot. Like, you know, that would probably turn me on or something like that. It's been very surprising the amount of times that that has happened versus in my head. Yeah, it used to be a process of like, oh, I can't share or for sure they wouldn't be interested in that, or, so I can't really share it because if I, ask for what I want, then it will lead to a rejection because they won't want it or something like that, like it was just completely made up stuff. So actually having like practicing having those conversations has been very nice. And then there's some people who are like, yeah, that's definitely like a boundary for me, but I'm open to these other things or whatever. And that's fine too. It's just like, okay, well, what other ways could we engage or could we play? And that would be pleasurable for both of us. And so, in both senses, like you're just learning about the other person. And I have been pleasantly surprised, I will say, in a lot of these cases, thinking like, oh, it's actually very different than what I've expected. And I think a lot of people are looking to reach outside of like social norms at this point or social pressures, and are interested in, doing things on their own terms and living life and having experiences on their own terms. And so it's not necessarily what one would assume or imagine, somebody would want, or I mean, not that we should be basing ourselves off of that anyway,
Right.
but I think people are more open
Yeah.
to, just experimenting and playing outside of social norms.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. It's the like you can't judge a like we all contain multitudes, right? And that's, and I think especially like pleasure and fantasy, like it's such an internal experience. Like I don't know what things feel like for you. I know what that feels like for me, and there are things that I might find pleasurable that you're like, I mean, it's nice, but it's not, it doesn't really hit the spot. You know what I mean? Like there's
Mhm.
like that kind of like personal preferences because we all have like our bodies respond to things in different ways. Um, or the amount of pleasure that we derive from something is going to be different. And so again, like it kind of goes back to just being open-minded and learning yourself. And I think that's the other thing too to remember is if you don't know, like it's okay to not know. And I think that can also open the door where you're like, I don't know what I want. I just know that I want to try something. Or if some, like, I remember, in my early 20s, someone was like, what's your fantasy? And I was like, I don't, what? Like, I was I don't, like, I don't know. My fantasies all involve like disappearing into another world and like having this like wild adventure. I don't think that's the type of fantasy you're talking about, though. So, right? And so it was sort of like, and especially like as an insecure person that I was, it was like felt like I had to make something up that wasn't real,
Mm.
like that kind of a thing. Where I felt that pressure of like, oh, I'm supposed to know this. Like, I don't know what do I don't like. I'm not used to that. Like, I'm not used to having these conversations. Like,
Right,
I'm not used to
exactly.
exploring this for myself. So what? Um, so I think just being able to like if you like especially I think if you're somebody in a dynamic where either if you're new to a scene that you're trying to explore, like you're like, maybe I do like I don't really know what I like, and so I want to start learning what I like. Um, and there's a couple of movies about this. I feel and there's one with oh I can see her face, the girl from Parks and Rec, Aubrey Plaza, where she like makes a checklist of things that she wants to try like before the end of the summer. And like and she's very like she's very like she feels like she's a Virgo, right? Like she has this checklist and she's like, okay, these are the things that I want to try. And as soon as she finds someone who's like willing to try it, like they do it, and it's like she checks it off her list and she determines it. Like it's like it was like it's great. It's really funny. But it was also kind of like, yeah, that's actually kind of brilliant. You know what I mean? Like having like figuring out what you want and being open to experimenting and being open to being new to it. Um, or if you're in the situation where like you're dating somebody or you're in a partnership with somebody who is much more sexually adventurous than you have been, like, you know, I think that can sometimes create that barrier. People aren't honest or people don't feel comfortable saying like, I don't know how to do that, or I don't know this, or I don't think I can keep up. And um, and having that conversation because they feel like they have to live up to a certain standard or they feel like they have to pretend like they know more than they do. And it's no, you know,
Absolutely.
and that's where it can get fun because I think that like it's okay to like vanilla. Like that's a classic for a reason. You know what I mean? Like it's like it's okay to not be into anything more than things that are really straightforward or simple or really, especially if you're more into the emotional connection of it, like in particular. Um, but or if it's just about connecting with that person, right? So like it's going to vary from person to person. And again, like relationships can get a lot of fun when you open things up to exploration and play and getting creative. And so it's like if you're open to it, if you're wanting to explore, you know, this isn't always the case. Like unless you're like if your partner is somebody who's like either more repressed or conservative or is like, no, I know I don't want that, then it's like, okay, maybe we have a compatibility issue. But, you know,
Mhm.
or that's a bridge you'll cross when you get to it. But I think for the most part, like people are like, yeah, let's try, like let's have some fun. you know?
Exactly. I think willingness, like I'm not concerned so much about somebody's skill level, right? It's
Yeah,
like it's just the willingness to do it that's fun and attractive, and it's like, being vulnerable about feeling like you don't really know what you're doing. I mean, again, to me, because that helps me understand like how you feel and where you're at, that's very attractive. It's turn on. So it's just more about like, okay, and maybe I feel the same way. Maybe I also don't really know what I'm doing, and or feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and that helps us bond. It's like, okay, we can learn this thing together.
exactly. I think it's that bonding because to me, I'm just like, there's sort of it's like scenes that I've imagined with like certain people where I'm just like, yeah, like I would think like both one or both of us would end up cracking up as if we're like trying to attempt this, like or trying to like play this out, or like we like I don't know if we could get through it like without laughing. But wouldn't that, but to me, laughter is a great, like, I love to laugh. So, like, and I don't know, I don't know anybody who doesn't love to laugh. Though I will say, like, this is where, like, Stoics tend to be my kryptonite because when you can make a Stoic person laugh, it feels so well earned. So,
True.
I'm like, got you, got you. But
Yeah, you would be a bratty sub for sure.
oh, 100%. I
I
would
definitely
like,
see it.
yeah, I would, yeah, I think I would, yeah, it would definitely be very challenging in that sense where I'd be like, I'd be a little too playful, a
I think that's great.
little too unserious. And like and this is where what is it called? Isn't there like a term for like a sub that kind of like controls from that position?
Topping from the bottom.
Yeah. Because I feel like that's essentially what I would try to do is I basically try to like get them to break character, like, the entire time. And I would feel really victorious and very pleased with myself if and when I accomplish that, you know?
I mean, it's part of the game.
Yeah. But that being said, I think even in general, regardless of, what dynamic, just the idea of like for me, I'm like, yeah, like doing that builds that bond, like builds that connection for me, where it's like, yeah, I'm not laughing at you. I'm intentionally trying to get you to break character because you're so fucking serious. So,
Right.
like relax a bit and let's see what happens. And then it's really fun
Exactly.
because then
Exactly.
because anyway, because the other part to me is like learning what makes somebody laugh, like learning what somebody's humor is also a way of like breaking through that shell or that exterior, like the masks that people wear that feel like a defense mechanism where it's like, yes, you are safe enough to laugh. You are safe enough to
Exactly.
like, be like to
Exactly.
admit that like you're a fucking human being. you know?
Exactly. I am a teaser for sure. So like people who are sensitive to teasing, it doesn't usually doesn't go over too well. Because yeah,
Yeah,
teasing is like a form for me of showing affection, but some people don't see it that way. Or
I
it doesn't
know.
feel that way for them.
It's such a fine line because and it's funny too because I feel like there was like I can be sensitive to certain types of teasing, but I am also a teaser. Like I feel like it's the kind of thing where like the closer I am, and this was something that I learned. I feel like I learned this in college when I was like outside of my home environment, and I was like, oh, not everybody responds to this the same way.
Right.
Because I can be like, you know, really like I can tease like people really harshly, but the people I do, like the only people I'm harsher with my teasing about are like the people that I like and trust and I feel closest to. So it's like, I'm not a full, I think I've broken out of like the full on like East Coast tough love, like aggressive form of like loving and teasing. Turns out that's actually not my natural state. That's just what I was raised in.
Right.
I can roll with it. But I do like to tease a lot. So
I
Uh,
think it's fun. It's part of the game.
yeah. Well, again, it's that like, I think when we take like when things are so serious, we put so much pressure on things. And that's what I think that's also the part that I like, that gives me a lot of joy and pleasure when I like meet someone who's like really, really serious and takes themselves so seriously. If I can break them, like, but not like in terms of their character, but if I can break that mask and get them to laugh, it's like, doesn't it feel nice to not have so much pressure on your shoulders? Like, doesn't it feel nice to not be carrying the weight of the world for a minute?
Exactly.
Like you don't like no one's making you do that. And if they are, then I have a lot of questions. But you know, like, is your name Atlas? And if not, why is anybody asking you to carry the world on your shoulders? But and also it's that kind of thing where it's like, it's my medicine and it's also my coping strategy because, it's easier to laugh than to get angry a lot of the time too. So
Right. Absolutely. Well, what else? I feel like
we covered a lot.
we've covered a lot here.
Like, how long have we been recording? I don't know. Oh, it doesn't tell me on the thing, but it won't tell me until it's done. Because we're
Well, it's been an hour and a half, and that was after I lost power when we came back on.
right. That's
Probably
right.
like at least an hour of recording.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like this is good.
I
Do
think
we
so.
want to do like a wrap up, like a final thoughts?
Sure. Um, trying to think. If you have final thoughts first, you can go ahead.
I
'Cause
would
I
say
forgot.
like, what are your like? All right, like I think we've reached a good stopping point. So like, what are your like final takeaways from this conversation? Or like, what was the highlight for you?
I mean, just being able to like talk about these things openly and even talking about play, like I feel lighter. I feel like a weight has been taken off, and all of the things I was so worried and stressed about during the day, like it did all of a sudden just like slide off. And I think that's part of it, right? Is like part of eroticism, sexuality, play, like in these ways. That's kind of the goal, right? Is like
Yeah.
so we can process all of these like worries and concerns and stress or whatever and like have a way to transform it into a different energy. And I
Yeah,
feel that like even just talking about it.
exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say this like similarly. It's like it's so these conversations are so fun, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this is so much fun. And it's like, yeah, like why not go out and explore and experiment right now? Like, you know, like,
Exactly. I'm like, what am I doing this weekend?
right? Yeah. Um, it's that freedom. I think that's like at the end of the day, and it's sort of like this feels like an extension of our last conversation in some ways too, where it's like, you know, being able to openly express about the things that give you pleasure and the ways you like to play, regardless of what forms they take, is just really fun. It's nice to be able to do that and, not fear death. Like that's nice. And then two, like, what was number two? Oh, shit. No, there was something else I was gonna say. But no, it's freeing. It's very liberating, right? Like it just feels really liberating because it's like I get to just be my fucking self. You
Exactly.
know?
And yeah, and just playing, like being in this sort of, it's kind of funny because it's an adult thing, but it actually feels like this childish space in some ways, like, oh, I can, yeah, not, I can just be a child and like not worry about, work and like all of these other, taking care of this or that thing and of the whole list of to do that I have. Like I can just kind of let that go and like be a kid in a way.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's like again, I'm like, we take ourselves way too seriously. And I say this as someone who took myself like very serious. I think that's part of why I am the way I am now and why I'm like I am gonna like as soon as I meet someone who like barely cracks a smile, like my goal is to make someone crack a smile. Like if I can get just a little bit of like a little bit, I'm like, all right, done. Yes, something, something. Because life is like, life is both too short and too long all at the same time for us to be so burdened all the time. Uh,
Exactly.
and and yeah. And so that the like it's about like creating the moments, right? Creating these moments of lightness. Kind of like what you're saying, right? Where it's like we have our lives, you know, like pain and suffering isn't going to go anywhere. Like
Right.
it's always going to be there in some form and it's going to come in different cycles. So why not like take the moments that you have to play and to have fun, to play and have fun and to laugh and to let
Exactly.
yourself be a little free. What's stopping you?
Well, I'm curious for the viewers, like what was interesting about this and what they want to hear more about, because I feel like there's so many different ways this could go, like you mentioned in the beginning. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of directions to take this.
Yeah. I'm curious what kind of questions we're going to get. I'm also really curious how many offers either of us get.
I was thinking that too, you know?
Just gonna name it because we all know it's gonna happen once we put this on the internet. But
Not necessarily a bad thing.
you know, but yeah. But I think it'll be interesting to see what folks respond to, and if there's anything that they want to learn more about or what questions you have. And then and because I think the other thing is even if we don't make another video, we can always put references, like if there's specific questions or if you're looking for more information about a specific thing, Allie or I can put some resources and references in the chat for either spaces or blogs or like informational materials, for people to explore. There was actually, I mean, I know we're trying to end this conversation, but like it came to my mind when we were talking earlier. But you found, and I feel like I can't remember where this came from. I feel like it was either a book or a website. But there was like a sort of checklist, like a pleasure checklist of like the different things that, and then people could fill out like open to, like yes, no, open to exploring or whatever. Like there's a whole, it's a really, if you're really organized, if you want to do that like Aubrey Plaza thing, movie thing of like making a checklist, one exists for you somewhere on the internet. But
Yeah, I think I can find that.
yeah, that was because I mean that was from your early, that was from like at least 2 years ago. So I don't remember, like that's where I'm like, I don't remember where it came from. I just remember you shared it with me and I was like, oh, this is really helpful.
Yeah, it's like an interesting guide.
Yeah. But it's not exhaustive, but it's like, if you're trying to explore, it's a good tool to help you figure out, you know, what you want to look into.
Exactly.
All right. Well, always a pleasure. I'm gonna,
Likewise.
all right, and we will see you when we see you.